Welcome to the Secunia webinar for the Microsoft Patch Tuesday in April 2011. My name is Stefan Frei. I'm Research Analyst Director at Secunia. For a quick overview, so yesterday that was Microsoft's biggest ever Patch Tuesday with 17 builders for in total 64 different vulnerabilities. One of those built-in is extremely critical, 11 are rated highly critical, 3 moderately and 2 lowly critical according to the criticality rating from Secunia. So there are many highly critical and very risky vulnerabilities. 2 vulnerabilities are already being exploited in limited targeted attacks. Some of the vulnerabilities were publicly disclosed. So for 10 builders and 44 vulnerabilities, consistent exploit code is likely according to Microsoft. 8 builders affecting 11 vulnerabilities, inconsistent exploit code is likely, and for 6 builders and 5 vulnerabilities, functioning exploit code is unlikely. The products affected with this Patch Tuesday, basically all Windows operating systems and all versions of Office, including Windows and Macintosh versions of Office, Internet Explorer and the .NET Framework and Visual C++ redistributable package. So let's have a look at the products. Internet Explorer is one build MS11-018. This is the most critical. We consider it as extremely critical. This is also the highest priority for patching. For the Windows operating systems, we have 12 builders with 43 vulnerabilities. 7 are highly, 3 moderately and 2 low criticality. For the Microsoft Office system, we have 4 builders with 15 vulnerabilities. All of them are considered highly critical. And for Microsoft Visual Studio, 1 builder with 2 vulnerabilities, and this builder is of high criticality. Let's have a look at the selection of the most interesting of the most critical builders according to our view. So we clearly have MS11-018. This is the Microsoft Internet Explorer, multiple vulnerabilities. This builder affects Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8. It does not affect Internet Explorer 9, so upgrading would be a good idea. So according to Microsoft, 2 of these vulnerabilities are being exploited in limited targeted attacks, which makes this an extremely critical vulnerability. This patch also replaces the patch from builder MS11-003, so if you have not yet installed this patch, go ahead and install this actual patch MS11-018 instead. So the vulnerabilities can be exploited to disclose certain sensitive information, to bypass security restriction and compromise a user system. One of the vulnerabilities with CV 2011-0346 was found by the publicly available CrossFuzz tool. CrossFuzz tool was released earlier this year. It's a fuzzing tool publicly available with which dozens of vulnerabilities in all popular browsers have been found. So while this tool is publicly available, it is likely that also other researchers or cybercriminals have used it and have already found this vulnerability. So it is extremely critical vulnerability. It was disclosed yesterday, and usual references are our Secunia advisory, the Microsoft builder, and the CV references for this advisory or for this builder are here listed. So the next 2 builders we look at are both the SMB Protocol Vulnerabilities, so it affects Windows XP Vista 7 and Windows Server 2003 and 2008, basically all supported versions of the Windows operating system. According to Microsoft, consistent exploit code is likely for those vulnerabilities. So we have an integer underflow error when processing a browser election request, and this can be exploited to cause a buffer overflow. The successful exploitation of this vulnerability may allow the execution of arbitrary code, but as a limitation it requires the target system to be a master browser. The second vulnerability, a validation error when processing SMB responses. It can also be exploited to execute arbitrary code just by sending a specifically crafted response to the client SMB request. So whenever you talk to a malicious server, you are at risk. We consider it a moderately critical vulnerability because firewalls and perimeter protection usually do not allow SMB requests. However, if you have an internal user or if you do not segregate your network properly, this could be an internal risk. Therefore, we only consider it moderate. It might be that we rise the criticality to highly critical if the situation changes, if you see exploitation in the wild. The second SMB builder is the transaction passing vulnerability. It again affects all current versions of the Microsoft Windows operating systems, and again consistent exploit code is likely according to Microsoft. The vulnerability is caused due to an error when passing certain fields in the SMB packet, and it can be exploited via a specifically crafted SMB packet sent to a vulnerable system running the server service. Execution of arbitrary code is possible after successful exploitation. We have a little bit more on this vulnerability. This build is rated critical by Microsoft, and it is rated moderately critical by Secunia. So the reason is that best firewall and security practices dictate that access to the SMB protocol is restricted at perimeter firewalls. So this vulnerability cannot be exploited from the internet. However, history shows that even companies that follow these practices get sometimes compromised because of lax security policies that result in somebody being able to bring in an infected notebook into the company network and then compromise the other attached systems. So pay attention if you have third parties coming into an environment, working with your environment. If they have infected notebooks or computers, bring them into the system or into your organization, and your organization does not have a specific internet or network access that segregates or disallows SMB, then you could be at risk. So the vulnerability does not require authentication to be exploited, so it has the potential to become a worm, or that an SMB worm can be created misusing this vulnerability. We are closely monitoring this vulnerability, and we may rise it to highly critical if we start seeing it actively exploited. Then we have built the MS11-028. It's the Microsoft.NET framework vulnerability, and it's a corruption in the JIT compiler. It affects Microsoft.NET Framework 2, 3, and 4, and according to Microsoft, active or exploit code is likely. This vulnerability has been disclosed publicly, so the bad guys already have some ahead notification. The vulnerability is caused due to an error in the JIT compiler when compiling certain function calls. This can be exploited to corrupt the stack and via specifically crafted XAML browser application plugins or processes. So successful exploitation allows the execution of arbitrary code. It's a highly risky vulnerability. It's exploitable from remote and allows system access. Then we have the most prominent Microsoft Office vulnerability or build. It's MS11-021. Multiple vulnerabilities have been discovered in Office and Excel. It affects most versions of Excel, of Microsoft Office XP 2003, 4, 7, 8, and 10, the Office Compatibility Pack, and in addition to that it also affects different versions of Office on the Mac operating systems, including the Open XML5 format converter for Mac. According to Microsoft, consistent exploit code is likely. So there are multiple vulnerabilities described in this build. They can be exploited to compromise the user's system and allow attackers to execute arbitrary code. This is a highly risky vulnerability. It's exploitable from remote and allows system access. As you see, there's a large list of CV identifiers to describe the individual vulnerabilities being patched with this bulletin. So then, interestingly, we have one bulletin. This is MS11-034. It addresses a record 30 local privilege escalation vulnerabilities in the Windows kernel mode drivers. So it is only considered a low-risk vulnerability because it can only be exploited locally, but it affects all versions of Windows, and when being exploited by a malicious local user, this user can gain escalated privileges. So many organizations draw comfort in giving their users and their workers and their staff only limited permissions on their systems. This is one way how to exploit or to cross this boundary. So it is a risk and it should be patched. We recently released a white paper that describes how cybercriminals do not need administrative users. Restricting the permissions of end users on their systems is a good thing, but it's not a silver bullet to prevent misuse or abuse, and one of the potentials to gain more escalated privileges is through the exploitation of vulnerabilities as we have it right here. So how do we prioritize the vulnerabilities? We wanted to limit ourselves to the top 3 bulletins. The case is very clear for the first one, the high prevalence of Internet Explorers and the 2 vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited make this the number 1 patching priority, MS11-018. So for patches, patch priority 2 and 3 depends a little bit on what your setup is. We would recommend MS11-028. This vulnerability allows conducting of browse and your own attack, so via malicious XAML browser applications. So this is very easy to exploit, and everybody has a browser. If you visit the wrong page, you get owned. So due to the ease of use, we would highly recommend to put this at number 2 patch priority. Number 3 is this Office and Excel vulnerabilities are built, MS1102.1. As events over the past days, for example the compromise of RSA, have proven that users are still opening untrusted Excel or other Office documents without showing proper care. So this, together with spear phishing, is a very high risk and it should be remediated as soon as possible. Other candidates that also should enjoy very high priority are the 2 SMB vulnerabilities that we discussed before. So as always, in our Patch Day webinar, a summary of all the most important information here. We have the build test together with the Secunia advisory identifier, so you can easily look up the information. The number of CVs indicates the number of vulnerabilities described in the build together with the date when it was published, criticality, the exploitability index from Microsoft. As we easily see, most of those builds have consistent exploit likely, which makes it a very heavily loaded Patch Tuesday. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to talk to you again in a month's time.